Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fireside Ghost Stories live by the Fireside. I just finished eating supper, and it's funny that I had a couple of burgers. Now, you're probably asking yourself, what does burgers have to do with ghost stories? Well, let me think about that. Let me talk about that for a minute. You see, sometimes when we're doing things ordinary is when the extraordinary happens. As it could be explained in my first story tonight. It's the thing in the hallway. You see, many years ago, when we were living at the old house, I was in 7th grade at the time, actually. I used to like to stay up, especially on Fridays. Like tonight, I like to stay up, read, sometimes play games and stuff, but at this time I didn't have a Nintendo or anything, and the closest thing I had was an Atari. Yeah, I did have one of those. But that's not the point. Friday evenings, I always was allowed to stay up for pretty much as long as I wanted to read and so forth, as long as I kept things down to where I wasn't disturbing my parents next in the room adjacent to where I was staying. Well, this particular Friday night, I was late in eating. And when I mean late, it was like 11:30, almost 12 o'clock. So, I grabbed a couple of cheeseburgers. This is what I was wishing for. Grabbed a couple of cheeseburgers. I loved cheeseburgers. Cheeseburgers were with hot dogs and pizza amongst some of my favorite foods. But I had made my cheeseburgers and I was eating. Yeah, I knew it was close to 11:30, between 11:30 and 12, because Pop was watching the evening news. And the sports had just went off. The sports time of it. Well, he got up, started toward the bedroom, and he looked at me and said, "Boy, hurry up and eat. Yeah, we can get back in your room. I'm going to bed." Yeah, he walked over, cut off the living room light, went on to bed. Now, at this point, I'm sitting at the dining room table. The living room light is off, but the light from the dining room is falling into the living room. Several moments pass. Pop is already in sleep. And I'm sitting there and I'm finishing up my first burger. And along about that time, I look up. And in the living room, I noticed something peculiar. A shadow made its way. Now, understand when I say a shadow, I mean the shadow of a man or man-like figure made its way across the door in the living room. And my first thought, okay, it's Pop. Then I thought, wait a minute. Pop's already in bed, and there is no one or nothing there to be the source of this shadow on that wall. So I found myself taken rather aback. And I was thinking about it, and I was looking at it, and I just kept watching while I was working on my second hamburger. And I kept watching. Well, I finished the burger, and not taking my eyes off the living room, I got up, turned around, went back to the kitchen, and through the kitchen to the bathroom. Did my business there, come back out. Went over, still watching the living room. Made a quick left to go through the hallway, and now understand when I mean go through the hallway meant there's a long hallway running alongside the stairs. I had to go across the hall to get to my bed. So, having cut off the dining room light, I walked into the hallway. I had taken no more than a few steps when I noticed something merely a couple of paces away. And I turned to regard what it was I was seeing. There before me, less than 5 feet away, was a cloaked figure. Now, it was cloaked. It was stood upright. I would have thought it would have been just a person, but the part where it was a shadowy figure cloaked was where the resemblance of anything human ended. You see, its head had this odd potato shape to it. And deep set in that potato-like head were a pair of eyes that burnt like glowing embers as it watched me. Now, mind you, if it wanted to move to catch me, it was less than 5 feet away. So, sudden movements and making a run for it were out of the question. So I watched it, and it watched me. And I watched it, and it watched me. So slowly I started skulking to the side, and made my way very carefully, making sure I did not take my eyes off of this thing, so that it couldn't just be gone and be somewhere or be on top of me and me not know it. But I watched this thing as I moved into the shadows of my room. Good thing was my light was on, so I went in there and I shut the door right quick. Now, I'd like to say that was the end of the story, but it was not at all, actually. You see, I went in, I had bunk beds. So I went in, and I hopped up on the bunk beds, up on top bunk where I always stayed, and laid across the bed rather than on the bed, so that my head and my feet, my head, and my arms, and everything were dangling off backwards. And I had this old black and white TV that sat right there on right there on my dresser, just beside of my bed. It was actually where my Atari was most of the time hooked up. See, the antenna had these rabbit ear antennas that popped up. As I was laying there, I just clicked the light and turned it off. No sooner than the darkness had enfolded around the room as the antenna on that TV just started moving back and forth. And when I mean moving, it was whipping back and forth as if something was just sitting there shaking it. And I saw that and I was like, whoa, what in the world? And I got up and I turned on the light and I sat there and watched it, and it kept doing our tear. It kept just whipping, and then after about 10 seconds, it just stopped, as if something held it. An eerie feeling came over the room that night. So I did end up staying up very late that night. Stayed up till the sun come up. Because, given the circumstances, I did not want to close my eyes. I did not want to go to sleep. Because I knew something had been in that room with me. And that thing was right outside the door. And that was the thing in the hallway. And the very reason I mentioned my burgers that I had for supper. You see, these are just strange sightings and strange events. My food, that just happened to be a part of it. We'll go to another story. This one takes place on an old country road and comes from both folklore, especially English folklore, around Lancashire County, and the Scary Stories books. How many of you remember the old story, May I Carry Your Basket? Well, this is one of those strange incidents. See, it was a late night when James was making his way home. He was somewhere he really shouldn't have been. He was drinking, which, anybody can go drink, have fun, whatever. But at this point, let's just say that his place needed to be at home this evening. But he was out drinking and enjoying himself, and then so he made his way home. He cut across an old country road that would span the distance between the pub and his house. That way he could get home a little faster. Now it was after midnight and the moon was shining down for all to see, casting an eerie glow over the land and highlighting everything in a pale, iridescent color. He made his way down the road a little way, his dog following right alongside him, when out of nowhere A shrill screech pierced the night, and his dog, normally brave, very, very good companion, not likely to leave his owner's side, tucked his tail and shied away and made its way off the road. James, not understanding what was going on with his dog, scolded the dog for being obnoxious, the word I'm looking for, and continued on up the road, more than just slightly inebriated. When he came over a crest of a hill, he saw somebody walking up ahead. And he quickened his pace and caught up, and was surprised to find that it was a maiden abroad at this time of night. And he was, "Hey, wait up, wait up, wait up. You don't have to walk alone, I'll walk with you." And a voice, soft and sweet, giggled and said, Thank you for walking." And so they began walking, and James would try to look up and see, who it was he was walking with, but for some reason, her bonnet and hood was up and always seemed to be turned just slightly away, as if looking off the side of the road, maybe checking out the hedge or looking down into the landscape. But he could never get a glimpse of her face. And he noticed that she was feverishly carrying a basket and would fumble with it every so often as she was carrying it. And so, just thinking to be nice, as inebriated as he was, James inquired, "Ma'am, may I carry your basket?" And so she stopped and just kind of handed it to her. And a voice, coming from the oddest of places, said, "Well, isn't that kind of you?" And he's like, "What?" And about the time he looked up at the person standing next to him, and the hood had fallen back, and where there should have been a head, there was none. The bonnet had fallen away, revealing that the woman he walked next to was headless, but that as he saw that, he heard a cackle come from the basket, and not understanding, he dropped the basket. As he dropped the basket, a woman's head, rolled out and rolled to the feet of the person standing next to him, and the face had this contorted grimace of mischievous and malicious contempt, just staring at him with a smile. And he looked at it, took a deep breath, and he edged to get away and tried to start getting away further and further. Well, the woman kicked her head at James, and it was flopping wrong, and started snapping at him and sunk his teeth into his leg, and the sharp pain just racked his leg as he ran, and he screamed and tore the head off and threw it back, and it went bouncing back, and the woman's torso and body was chasing him, and it picked up the head, and as they were running, as he started to crest the hill, she'd toss it again, and the head just come rolling down, and then it would make a hit just right and launch, and sunk his teeth into his leg again, and he screamed with both terror and fright and pain, and tore the head off and threw it to the side and threw it back, and the thing picked up its head, flung it at him again, and it's snapping at his feet as he leapt over it to keep it from biting again. And it continued like this until he come up and crossed over a stream. And he jumped over that stream as hard as he could, hoping that the old legends are true, that things of the foul nature cannot cross a running water. As he got away and crossed to the top of a hill, he looked back and he saw the ghoulish creature with its head in its hand, still sitting there mocking him from the stream side, unable to cross, but just snapping and just trying to find its way around after him. He never stopped or slowed down once until he got home. When he got home, his wife looked at him. "What are you so tired for?" And when he told her the tale of what happened, he was like, "Well, it's a sad thing that it took more than just common sense to have you out home at a better time. That it took foul spirits sinking their teeth into you to do the other." And that is the tale of the thing in the basket. Or, as Scary Stories would name it, "May I Carry Your Basket?" There are some strange tales in the world. There are tales of people being alone in the dark, wishing for a light, only to feel the match pushed into their hand at the last minute. There are tales of strange incidences of happenings inside of a house during a time when things should be normal. This next tale, coming also from the Scary Stories, is one of those. Footsteps, adapted from the Scary Stories and Folklore. Oops, excuse me. Oh, goodness. It's a long day catching up with a person. And that's dreams trying to say, "Hey, I want to come visit." Now, our next story, Footsteps, adapted from the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark book by Alvin Schwartz and from Folklore. You see, Darcy was home by herself, with only her sister Sarah, who was asleep upstairs. Well, Darcy was downstairs and just reading and minding her own business. She heard the door open and somebody come inside. The footsteps, though, at first she thought maybe it's her sister. But the footsteps were heavy, more man-like. So she listens, the footsteps come in, paced across the, oh Lord, I can't think of the name of it, the foyer, went up the stairs, and was going across the room when she thought, Sarah's upstairs, I need to go check on her. So she jumped up and went upstairs. Despite all the footsteps that she heard, Sarah was sound asleep upstairs. And nobody else was to be seen. Well, as she was checking on Sarah, the footsteps started again, going back down the steps, and started around through the living room, into the kitchen, and out toward the back door. And she heard the back door start to open. And at that moment, she yelled, "Get out!" And as she did, the back door opened, the steps went out, and the door closed, and the steps were never to be heard again. She ran downstairs to see who it was and tore open and looked out the window at the back door. And there, in the fresh, new fallen snow, were no signs of any footprints or anyone having ever entered or left the house. And that is the end of Footsteps. But since we're talking about footsteps, and we're talking about strange things in dining rooms and such, let me tell you the strange case of the dancing specters that took place on Lacey Road. You see, my mom was home alone one night, and she liked to read, especially liked to read romance novels and stuff, her Harlequin books. And while she did, she usually sat on this one particular section of the couch. And so, as it was this one night, as nothing nothing peculiar was happening, nothing new, nothing weird. It's an ordinary night, or at least so it seemed. But as she stood there, as she sat there reading, she noticed something peculiar on the staircase. And as she looked, a couple come dancing, just waltzing down the stairs. And they would dance down the stairs, and they danced at the base of the stairs on the footing, and down onto the main foyer, and then back down the hallway where the events that I had told in my story before. They danced down the hallway, and they danced out the back door and down the back steps. And Mom went and watched as the couple danced, just continued to waltz and continued to dance, and they went off into the woods. And the dancing specters were never to be seen again. Now, this is a legend of Lacey Road. So this is one of the stories from my old house. Well, I think I might have time for maybe one more story. What will it be, I wonder? You see, I love telling ghost stories. I love telling tales. And I love sharing these legends of Lacey Road because, like the scary stories, like many of the great tales and ghost stories in our history, they're tales that need to be told, that need to be passed down so that people know what is the things that have come before. Thank you, Evil Santa. And I hope you're well tonight and having a wonderful, wonderful Halloween season. So the final story tonight is a strange incident coming from my upstairs bedroom. This will be another Legends of Lacey Road. See, Nathan had come to spend the night with me, and Nathan was one of my good friends. Actually, Nathan is one of my good friends. But at this time, this was back in 8th grade, 9th, somewhere in there. He'd come to stay with me overnight. Now, this is the same Nathan that has a different story for the same night. So same Nathan, different time. Well, what happened as I was as he and I were laying down to go to sleep, my bunk beds that I had mentioned in the first story have been taken down into twin beds and set up in the upstairs bedroom. Now, this is the same upstairs bedroom where the hand went across the window from a story a couple weeks ago. Just to give you an idea of in perspective of where things were taking place. And Nathan was at the bed by the window. Nathan was in the bed by the door. I was in the bed by the window. Because that was my bed that I always stayed in. That was the same one that was the top bunk at the time. Well, as we were laying there and we were talking, Nathan began telling me that something was scratching at his foot. And I was like, what? He said, yeah, man, there's something scratching at my foot. I'm like, well, kick at it. And he's like, oh, I just moved my foot. And he'd move his foot. And it'd stop for a couple minutes. And we'd be talking, and all of a sudden, it'd start scratching at his foot again. And he's like, man, I moved my foot, and it's scratching at it again. And he'd move it, it'd stop. And this went on for a little bit, and I said, Nathan, I said, just kick at it. And he's like, man, whatever it is messing with my foot, I'm not kicking at it. He said, switch beds with me, and when it messes with your foot, you kick at it. I was like, okay, sure, why not? So he and I switched beds. And I was laying there, and he and I were talking, and I could plain as day see him in the bed talking to me, and, from the light coming through the window. So I know he wasn't pranking me. Because he was just in plain sight, but sure enough, as he described, something softly just began messing with my foot. So I moved my foot, and I was like, you're right, something is messing with my foot. And he's like, see, I told you something was messing with my foot. And I was like, it's alright. I moved my foot, and a few minutes later, it started scratching. I was like, alright. I moved my foot one more time. If it does it this time, I'm going to kick at it. Nathan said, alright. And he and I kept talking. Sure enough, it started scratching at my foot again. So I kicked at it to get it to stop. Like, kind of leave me alone kind of kick. Oh, it stopped. For just a split second. Then in the time it took for it would normally to start doing this, instead of scratching my foot, I felt something just grab my leg. Right there above my ankle, on my foot, just grab. I literally went from laying down to somehow being in the air, telling Nathan to move over because I'm coming for a landing. So the bed by the window became crowded, and the bed by the doorway was left vacant. And we sit there and we pretty well marveled over what had just happened until we finally at some point in the night fell on asleep. But Nathan would never sleep in that bed again. He wouldn't go near that bed again after that. At least not when it came to that. He would sleep in the chair where my Nintendo stuff was or something, but he would not sleep in that bed again. And truthfully, I couldn't say that I blame him after that, especially after that grabbed my leg like it did. So, this is a legend of Lacey Road which has not been written down just yet, but it will be, along with the many, many other legends of Lacey Road, which I am working on my next Legends of Lacey Road that I hope to have up by Halloween, maybe sooner. And once I get these Legends of Lacey Road finished and put up, I'm going to begin compiling them and see if I have enough to make a small volume to bind together, and that way they'll have a collection of ghost stories of the Legends of Lacey Road and Tales of the Fireside. Well, I have enjoyed these ghost stories this week, and it is getting a little bit later, and it's time for me to go ahead and wind down for this episode. I hope everyone has a wonderful week. Next week, if I'm not mistaken, next week will be the final week of the Ghost Stories by the Fireside. Maybe we'll have a great story night. Let's see what happens. Now, depending on the weather, it may be here inside of my place, or it might be out by the campfire. Yeah, out in my mom and them's backyard, like we've been the last couple of times when we've gathered. So, and I do know that Clinstagram Cosplay and Boba Egg Roll are planning to rejoin me again for that night. So, maybe it'll be a great night of spooky stories, and maybe we'll do an extra long session just for the fact that it's the Halloween weekend. Alright. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed these stories, and I hope you have a wonderful, safe weekend, a good, spooky Halloween season. There's some great horror movies. Find some ghost stories and read, and enjoy the reason for this time of the season, which is the thinning of the veil and the end of the summer, and just the time when the shadows stretch out to envelop the land and embrace it in night's gentle, loving, caring, very cold embrace. Alright, everyone, have a wonderful evening. It was good having you join me. Thank you, Evil Santa, for joining me. And I hope to see everyone again soon. Hopefully you'll join me next week for another live Ghost Stories by the Fireside. Until then, peace out, and see you in the shadows.